different types of forces arise when running. For example, there are vertical forces, lateral forces, different types of rotational forces, and so on. But you could say that there are good forces and bad forces. Forces that propel you forward are generally good. Braking forces are not good. And if you have large lateral forces when you run, you leak energy sideways, which obviously not only costs unnecessary energy, but also increases the risk of injury. In this video, you will see an example of how I got a runner to have less than half of the lateral forces in a short session than when he arrived at my place. Or, to put it in another way, he had 127% higher lateral forces when he came to my running technique studio than when he went home. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Sure, it can be good to try to reduce the forces and the strain on your body when running, as high forces can cause you to tire more quickly or increase the risk of injury. But of course, it also depends on what kind of forces we are talking about. Vertical forces are good for increasing speed. But as I said in the introduction, braking forces, lateral forces, screwing and twisting forces, they usually just cost energy. Lateral forces are forces that causes your center of gravity to move sideways. Since 2014, I have been measuring exactly how much lateral forces runner exert, and I have probably done about 10,000 tests by now. My software measures how fast and how much your center of gravity moves sideways. And it's not about runners running a little wobbly on my treadmill. Instead, these forces arise mainly when you land, as instability that can cause your center of gravity to move sideways. It is extremely common for runners to have a quite high lateral forces. And when I started measuring this in 2014 and discovered how common it was, I was quite surprised, as it wasn't something I had thought about before as a major problem. And how lateral forces arise was not something I had learned in any of the courses I had taken. But now, after 11 years of testing, I have of course seen a pattern in what causes this. Or rather, I have seen several things that increases the lateral forces. But here I will focus on one of the two biggest factors, and that is how wide you place your feet when you run. If you place your feet a little bit too wide, the lateral forces increases immediately. And even though my software measures how quickly and how much runners shift their center of gravity sideways, this obviously also affects other parts of the body, which leads to an increased lateral forces in the joints. And if there's one thing that the body is pretty bad at, it's dealing with lateral forces in your hip and knees. At least compared to how good knees are at absorbing vertical forces, which is what they are built to do really well. And the reason for increased lateral forces when you put your feet a bit too wide is that when your feet is out here, your body loses the balance and start to move the other way, and which you then put your foot out and catches that movement, and this will start to increase your lateral forces. Let's take a look at a runner who came to my running technique studio here in Stockholm, Sweden, not long ago, who had quite large lateral forces. In this picture, you can see his measurement values, which is the light blue arrow and the number at the top. Ideally, his arrow should be in the green zone, but as you can see, he's quite far from the green zone. Looking at how wide he placed his feet, it was 110 millimeters, 4.3 inches, which my software considered to be wide, and so do I. I made a few adjustments to how he ran, but I wasn't focusing on how wide he was placing his feet. He had other things that were much more important to correct first. And then we did another test, and then he placed his feet 75 millimeters apart, almost 3 inches, which is obviously less than the 110 millimeters, 4.3 inches in the first. if we look at what happened to his lateral forces, they have also decreased significantly. We then made further adjustments to his technique and introduced how he should move his hips in harmony with his core and his upper body. And if you've seen several of my other videos, you know that there should be a three-dimensional rotation of the pelvis when running. Now, let's pretend that this is my pelvis. And what happens when the hip moves like this is that the feet moves slightly towards the center. If the hips are still, the feet and the legs end up here, which is way too wide, while they end up more towards the center with the rotation. So I never asked the runner to place his feet closer together, even though we had noted that his very high lateral forces during the initial test, which were probably due to his wide foot placement. And this is how I usually work. I see what needs to be adjusted, but I know it starts somewhere else in the body. The hip rotation depends on other things. That's where I start, which makes the hip works as it should, placing the feet closer together, which drastically reduces the lateral forces. It's a chain reaction. If you can find the beginning of this chain reaction, you will get the desired result without directly addressing the problem. And then we did a third test. And sure enough, without even thinking about it, his feet ended up closer together, 37 millimeters, about 1.5 inch, compared to 110 millimeters, 4.5 inches in the first test. And what happened to the arrow showing his lateral forces? Well, it moved down into the green zone, of course. So, by making a few adjustments to how he moved when he ran, his feet ended up a little closer together, which reduced his lateral forces by 56%. That is less than half of the forces compared to when he arrived. My measurement data also showed a significant reduction in lateral forces in his hips and knees. And this is a fairly common scenario. I actually had a runner who came to me a while ago because he had pain in his knee when he ran. And he also placed his feet too wide, similar to this runner in this example. And when I taught him the rotation of the hip, so the feet were placed a little more narrow, he immediately said on my treadmill, "Well, now my knees doesn't hurt anymore." And then I asked him to go back and run as he usually did, which made him say, "Well, now my knee hurts again." Which of course made me tell him to go back to the running with the hip rotation so that his feet came closer together, which made him say again, "Now the pain is gone." Can you place your feet too close together? Of course you can. However, this does not usually affect lateral forces at all, but instead increases the load on the IT band. So what is the right distance between your feet? Well, somewhere around 3 to 4.5 centimeters, 1 to 1.5 inch between the inside of your feet. That is usually good. Is a wide foot strike the only way to create large and unnecessary lateral forces when running? No, absolutely not. Unnecessary high lateral forces are very common, and how wide you place your feet is not even the most common cause of them, although it comes in as a close second. The most common cause of large lateral forces comes from how you move your shoulders. But that is material for another video, or maybe I won't even make a video about it because it's really easy how to do it and how to understand how it works. You just have to buy my online course, The Art of Efficient Running Technique. You find a link to it in the description below, and you get a lifetime access to knowledge you won't find anywhere else. See you in another video.
Things that never happened.
Sure, they both look good and fast, but I actually have enough running shoes already and don't need another pair.